All right, welcome back to the Desert Harvest podcast. I'm with my partner in crime, Mr. Oren Molovitsky. Oren, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Pete. What's shaking?
Well, last week I was kind of pissed off at you, because you've been making all this incredible pizza and bagels, but I got over it. I got over it. But uh, my jujitsu professor is pissed off at you this week, though.
Oh, really?
So yeah, because
That's
I've
probably
been,
not good.
it's not good. Because now I have lost my weight class. I'm bumped up to the next weight class.
Uh-oh.
So he says you have to shut down your drive-through. He's like Barrio Bagel and Slice can't have the drive-through, and with that app can't be as convenient. So when I order through the app, he says you can only get me the food if I agree to run to pick up my
Nice.
sandwich or my bagel. So you can answer to him.
So are you fighting Andre the Giant this
If
next
I
term?
keep if I keep up my pace, I'm gonna be about
Nice.
that. Well, look, we have had, just amazing good fortune talking to all kinds of fascinating, interesting people. And I don't know what we did in a previous life to be so lucky, but we have another week just like that. So uh, we have a great guest named Mr. Brett Vibber. So Brett, thank you for taking some time to talk with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Brett, we feel strongly about Arizona's agriculture, Arizona's culinary strength, and we don't think that people appreciate quite, what we have going on here. So we'd like your opinion. Like, what do people miss about the Arizona culinary scene, or perhaps misunderstand?
I've kind of brushed this question a few times with different groups of people, and I think the biggest misconception is that if you're not from here, you have this perception of what Arizona, not even what the scene looks like society wise or sociologically, but just physically what it looks like. Just to put her on blast one more time, but my wife moved out to Arizona 14 years ago, sight unseen. And when we were getting ready to leave Chicago and I was coming back home and she was going to do something new, the group of us that were based out of Chicago just kept getting a kick out of it. So our last night in Chicago, I said, tell these, most of us were Scottsdale and Phoenix born and raised. But we'd found ourselves with a restaurant group out in Chicago years ago. And, the last night we were there, I said, tell these guys one more time what you think Arizona's going to look like. With a little bit of blush on her face, said, okay, you guys remember those old Looney Tune cartoons? And Roadrunner was chasing after the coyote, and there's a house every so often or a building, but mostly just a lot of red clay. And we all just laughed and for the umpteenth time reminded her, like, you're going to the fourth biggest city in the country.
Right.
Right.
And so I always start with that. I always think it's people that haven't been here have no idea what Arizona looks like. You
Right.
see some of the iconic pictures of saguaros in the desert, and most people gravitate probably more towards that. But I'm sitting in the Verde Valley right now, looking at pine trees and the last patch of snow up on the mountain south of me, and the last patch of snow
Yeah.
on the mountain north of me. And just the geographic diversity of Arizona is unknown more to anyone, I think, than anything. So you get finally when people come out here, they say, "Oh, there's pine trees," or
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
constantly get, on my social media feeds of like, "I didn't know you could find mushrooms in Arizona. They grow in the desert." I'm like, "Oh, they grow in the mountains at 9,000 feet."
Right.
Where in Arizona? And like, 9 times out of 10, I just don't wanna always answer and finish that story with, like, "Just come out here."
Right. Right. Yes. Yes.
Wait, actually, don't come out here. You won't like it at all. It's terrible.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
All the bad things that you've read. So I always start and kind of stop with that's the biggest misconception is, 1, how big of a metropolis that Phoenix is, but
Right.
2, the geographic diversity of Arizona and just how different parts of this state look. Northern Arizona looks like Colorado. Southern Arizona looks like northern Mexico. Uh, because same thing as I've pointed out to people before, just because we drew these lines
Right.
on the
Right.
Doesn't mean like, oh, here's Arizona. This is all desert, right? And so it's different. It's different how the country grew. It's different how the country expanded. In just what Arizona actually is in and of itself, without even the culinary scene, is just one of the biggest misconceptions I've probably ever either had to describe or have really witnessed in humans and in people that have not been here. That's kind of it in a nutshell at the end of the day.
So how has this great diversity, chef, informed how you've gone about thinking about how you want to construct menus, how you want to source your food? I know you have, a great deal of diversity in how you're sourcing your food as well. So how do those two things interact?
For me, it's nice because I'm capable of doing things in Arizona with menus and food items that literally no one else in the world is capable of doing. Uh, the saguaro fruits only grow here. A lot of the cactus, a lot of the Sonoran Desert, flora is only located in Arizona,
Yeah.
and maybe northern Mexico a little bit, but nowhere else on Earth do we have some of these things. So therefore, it lends me to be able to use unique ingredients, maybe in traditional techniques. I spent a lot of time in Japanese cuisine. I spent a lot of time in Italian cuisine. So to be able to bring maybe some of those nostalgic or familiar feels and looks of techniques to dishes, but with completely unique ingredients, I think there's not very many places in the world that you actually could do that.
Yeah, I mean the saguaro, bloom and the saguaro fruit, I think is an iconic,
Yep.
that even if you haven't encountered it here, you're probably aware of it through
Postcards.
postcards and so on
Or
and so forth.
that's
Yeah.
dating myself. So when we used to send postcards, you used to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
Mark.
exactly. Well, it's funny when you talk about like I'm from New York
Yep.
originally, and so Oren's from the Washington D.C. Maryland area as well. And people do have to get used to a different palette of colors in the southern part of the state, but the northern
Sure.
part of the state I think is familiar in terms of the palette that they're visiting. And when you
Yeah.
talk about people being um, surprised or whatever. I had a relative from Italy that lived in rural Sicily, and this was in the late 70s, early 80s. We had moved out from New York here, and he came to visit, and he got off the plane, and the first thing he said to me was, "Where are all the cowboys and Indians?" As far as he was concerned, it was Hollywood of the 1940s that had kind of informed his
Right.
knowledge of the state.
And I think that's pretty factual, if not, stereotypical, if not factual of Arizona. I came back to Scottsdale in 2006 and opened Roca Core, and all of the staff was coming from different parts of the world. It's based out of London. That's where the original restaurants are. So we were bringing Germans, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans,
Yeah,
not American Japanese, not American, but people from different
right,
countries
right. Immigrants.
coming to Scottsdale, and even they themselves were wondering when they got off the plane, I'm like, why are we opening this like what's a Michelin starred restaurant everywhere else in the world in like the Wild West?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the chefs for a couple of days, something seemed off with them. And I finally said, like, you guys seem a little bummed out. Like, what's going on? And three of the Chinese guys that I became really good friends with, one spoke decent enough English, and he said, "Oh, we were just expecting something a little different." And I said, "All right, pray tell,
Right.
what were you expecting?" They're like, "Well, where's like all the people like John Wayne at?" And I said, "Well, same thing for the millionth time in my life." I said, "You do realize you're in one of the biggest cities, and it's a very large country, and it's a very large city. If you guys want to see those types of people, they definitely still exist.
Right.
Or I have to jump in my truck on Wednesday and little drive."
Right.
So I started, I drove them around the state for a whole, 12 hours of a day.
Nice.
Finally, they were seeing places like Bisbee and Tombstone and things like that, where they're like, "Oh, like this is why
This is what we,
why would we build a restaurant like that?" I don't love Tombstone in every part of Arizona, but I think a little bit about, what you were getting yourselves into. And they're like, "We thought we thought it was going to be a lot different. Like, do you like it? No, 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 we love it. We just, our preconceived notion of what we were coming to
Right.
is totally 100% opposite of what it actually.
what it was. So maybe you can expand a little more on the uniqueness of the ingredients and flavors that you've constructed over the years,
Sure.
and in particular, maybe things that like the saguaro cactus won't surprise anybody, but I think that many things that you have incorporated into the dishes you've constructed over the years, the menus you constructed would surprise people as being something that Arizona would provide in an excellent manner. So, could I ask you to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I honestly think that the desert stuff doesn't really surprise people. You know, they're intrigued by it a lot of the times, but like, oh, I've seen nopales. Oh, I've
Yeah,
seen
right, right.
pear juice. I honestly think that it's the northern part of Arizona that people don't understand. Everything in the Pacific Northwest, everything for the most part in the Pacific Northeast or in the Northeast, uh, we have here.
Yeah,
It's just that matter of you know, public understanding that it is here. So I think a lot of times the things that get people with me are, cattail shoots or pine pollen or all the diversity of wild mushrooms that we have. I just am kind of wrapping up morel season right now, unless it starts raining again. I'm kind of wrapping that up for the season and, across social media and having done this for a better part of 30 years now, I just constantly know the times of the years that I'm gonna
yeah,
get the most interaction off, like, direct messages or comments of like, "Oh, I had no idea morels existed in Arizona," or, "I had no idea that, porcini family existed in Arizona," or, "What do you use cattails for?" And,
Mhm.
"Pine pollen, did you get that shipped in from someone?" Like, "No, I live just south of the biggest ponderosa forest in the
yeah,
world."
in the
So
world, yeah.
so it's just that kind of, I think that other part of the state that people just don't wrap their heads around literally until you do come here. I mean, I think Flagstaff's becoming a better known place as far as, the general populace of the country or even, outside of the country. People might know, but for the longest time, it was such a well-kept, not even secret. It was just,
It's just
well,
unknown, right? Yeah, it was.
right. It was just,
Yeah,
well, just
yeah, yeah. No, we agree with that. And morels, I think, are an example of something that would be counter to what people would think is available here. And I think of it in a couple of different ways. One, as just the nature of the thing itself,
Yep.
something that people wouldn't associate with the state from a geographical perspective, but also a certain refinement that often follows the morel
Sure.
dishes. I mean, all of that. As Oren was looking through some of the uh, menus and creations you've had online, or you had a couple of thoughts about ingredients and sourcing as well.
Well, I definitely do, but I just kind of keeping on this little thread of expectations of Arizona cuisine.
Mhm.
I guess my question to you is have you seen a shift at all since you've been cooking or since you've been back cooking here in 2006 in Arizonans appreciating their home
Mm,
cuisine?
nice.
I know getting out of towners in, sometimes the first stop is Mastro's or
Yep.
something like that in North Scottsdale,
Yep.
because you're here for a convention or something. But what's your take on the evolution of the diner here in Arizona?
Oh, totally taken off. We used to say that Arizona was like 10 years behind the culinary trend. Phoenix was
Hmm.
5 years behind the culinary trend. I think that gap like totally closed over the last 7 or 8 years,
Hmm.
where you're seeing just because, when I was young in Arizona, it's not that there weren't good restaurants. It's one, Phoenix is also one of the fastest growing cities in the country and has been
Yeah.
pretty much since conception. But really since the 70s has just exploded, uh,
Hmm.
size and growth. But in just like it did from the beginning, it's constantly and always attracted people that were looking for something different. They were looking for whether they consciously acknowledged it or not, they're looking for some sense of adventure. You're still looking inside of your heart for that Wild West, free of ambition type type feel of like, go do something to, go west, young man.
Yeah, yeah, right.
That, that we still have that feeling out here, and we still have that's built into the culture. And I don't think it'll ever go away, nor would you want to see it go away. That for me, I've watched the culinary scene totally, I would say, explode over the last, just say 10 years, where chefs are embracing not just locally grown things, but things that are their heirloom and their
Yeah.
heritage, label things through agriculture and beef, and almost going back to like those 5 C's that Arizona was founded on,
Mhm.
and just kind of embracing it more than chefs in the 80s or 90s that were here that opened really good restaurants, but they were probably really good French restaurants, or they were probably really
Right.
good in restaurants, or the first Japanese guy that came to Phoenix and opened a very good Japanese restaurant. That's all great, but what I've seen the shift in is, I make miso out of Ramona Farms tepary beans every year. Well, now I see 3 or 4 guys doing that,
Mhm,
and that's the dream. That's the idea. That's the goal.
mhm,
I've seen some companies started sourcing products that I typically try and forage myself, uh, but to at least be able to give that out to local chefs that say like, "Hey, these are local blackberries," or "Hey, these are Arizona black raspberries," or "Hey, we've got a ton of saguaro fruit," or "Hey, we've got, cholla buds." And I think a really big thing is Ramona Farms in Sacaton, that they've been there for decades, but
mhm,
but it sometimes takes that long for, like, a whole group of
Yeah.
people to buy into what you have, and so to have watched them grow, over the last 10 years, like, those are the things that warm my heart. It's not like, you know, in 30 years, no one's gonna remember who I am or what I did, but the chefs that I taught and the chefs that were below me and the cooks that became chefs and the customers that enjoyed the food, they're gonna continue seeking those things out. So it's not about it's not about me, my name, or my legacy is to pass this information along and to pay it forward. So, chefs don't have any money to leave anyone or anything like that. So it's your knowledge. It's what you put into it,
mhm,
turn right back around and give it back. And that's kind of where I got out of a couple of years ago, like selling out of the last of my restaurants. Was I wanted to get back, I wanted to get to a group of people where I could teach not just cooks how to become better cooks, but teach chefs how to become better chefs. And that's kind of what drove me and brought me to Cottonwood in the first place, was an opportunity to be able to teach chefs like, yeah, that's really good flour you have right there. Have you tried this flour that's grown right down the
Yeah,
road?
right.
We have Sonoran white wheat. It's been here for hundreds of years. It's milled by Hayden Farms and just those kinds of things. So whether it's wild and heritage products or things that are grown now in Arizona, those are my jams.
Yeah.
Those have always been the things that excite me. I could open a fantastic Italian restaurant. What's special about it?
Right.
Well,
mhm,
I've lived in Italy. I studied Italian cuisine and think I absorbed the culture. I'm like, okay, well, I could open an awesome Japanese restaurant for the exact same reasons. How do I open an Arizona style restaurant? What
Yeah.
is and it's not Mexican cuisine, because that's something totally different. I think we're a new enough culture here out in the West that it's still being defined.
Yeah.
That's a fun thing to be a part of, is watching a cuisine actually be defined. When I lived in Italy and cooked in Italy, you would go from, zona to zona to zona to zona, and things would be completely different. But they've been being done that way there for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yes.
mhm,
We're here, we're still learning how to get on with all the cultures that were here before us. We're still learning to pass that respect back to the natives that were here before us. And so things like that, that's the very exciting part for me, is, riding that first wave of something new.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about the palette of colors in terms of flavors, the palette of flavors we have to work with, that it's a very broad set of things that are right next to us. And I mean, obviously, well, Oren with Don Guerra opened Barrio Bagel and Slice, and I mean, and that's that supply chain that starts with Hayden Flour Mills is 5 minutes away from Barrio Bagel and
Yep.
Slice and those agricultures. We're of the mind too that what you're teaching has is going to reverberate for years and years and years, not just because of the flavor, because it has to be delicious. Like
Yep.
things, can't be an act of virtue. It has to be an act of, right? I mean, but what part of what we contend is that the things that are done the best taste the best
Yeah.
and are the best for you and are the best for the people down the supply chain.
For
So,
sure.
a farmer that's getting to do things right is producing something that tastes better, is better for the environment, and that
Right.
becomes healthier food and a more exquisite sort of culinary experience as well.
Right. In the foraging world, I constantly have people asking me, like, do you do anything medicinal? I said, "Dude, it's the food we just gathered. Like,
That's right. It's all medicinal.
or your body wants to eat the things that are provided for us in this ecosystem. It's why, the easy, and there's always got to be a little bridge to gap, to get people to understand that. So my main thing is like, well, you've heard, when you have allergies or a bad cold or a flu, you should be eating local honey, not local honey that's sold locally, local honey that the bees made locally.
Right.
Uh, because that contains so many things that'll help your allergies and your ailments. Well, it runs all the way through food. It runs
Yes.
not just the honey. It's for I tell people often I love serving venison with blackberry, some kind of blackberry compote,
Right.
with fiddlehead ferns and morel mushrooms. Why? Because they all were right there together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, and I know it's hard for some people, but they're coming around to it more than they were. But for me, that makes so much sense because they grew together. They live symbiotically in the forest together. Why? That's nature telling you to eat those things together.
Mhm.
N
Mhm.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I mean, my wife had a naturopathic practice. She's a physician, and for years and years, we would talk about, like, the amount of money that was being spent by her patients
Oh yeah,
without ever on medications, on synthetic medications, where none of the doctors those patients had previously had talked about what they were eating.
like
And so many times we had stories of people eating poorly and then her adjusting their diet and coming off of $10,000 a month medications,
right.
after 8 weeks of eating properly. And so the work you're doing in my mind is like you're a physician of sorts. I mean that's the expression, right? Either food is either your, safest medicine or your slowest poison,
Right.
right? I mean, and that's so as you teach the chefs, you're also teaching the consumers that
Yep.
are coming through the door, which, gives a marketplace back to the people who are doing all this extraordinary stuff. When you think about that trajectory over time, do you see it as like where's it going? Where's it going? Will more people do what you're doing, or will
I
people be
hope so.
doing yeah, tell me about that.
That's just it, right? And when you when you dedicate your life to something, you want it. At least for me speaking, it's not about me. It's about what it becomes. It's did I get another group? This is the time of year I typically take groups out foraging on Saturday mornings and Wednesday mornings. Did I make a connection with these people? Are they gonna start foraging on their own? Uh, it's so funny because we're only a couple of generations removed
Yeah,
from this being a part of life.
right.
I go a lot of other places in the world, whether it's to cook or to speak on these kinds of things, that they never lost it. They never lost.
Yeah.
We got ourselves in a real big hurry with, and you can look back at like things that are tipping points in society, and often
Yes.
that we think point right. So when we got the railroads, did we mess up our diets? Well, surely we did.
Mhm.
We stopped eating as locally, and then air traffic came into play, and so okay, now we can fly fish and product from around the world
Right.
somewhere with 24 hours. That's great because it tastes delicious, and I'm sure they're quality products, but it's not the biome in which you're living in, and
Yes.
and to not go like all the way down the scientific hole, but it is that. It's just it's those things of why don't we do this anymore? Well, because we've become lazy. We've become,
Mhm.
and it's so funny to me a lot of the times. I mean, laugh out loud funny to me oftentimes that, people say like, "Where did you think this up?" I'm like, "I didn't think it up. I, I didn't think it. This is how humans came into fruition in the first place. Or
Right.
some of the most basic instincts and fundamentals of being human beings is serving ourselves and feeding ourselves. So I think it's going in a great way because I see a lot of restaurants that I haven't seen a lot that open solely on foraging concepts as mine have, but a lot that I see more embrace of local farms over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I see more embrace of heirloom and heritage grains and vegetables and things of that sort. So if it's just a little piece that a lot of people are getting, it becomes
Yes.
a big thing at the end of the day where this generation of chefs in Arizona is defining what Arizona cuisine is.
Yeah.
And chef, when you're helping maybe chefs who don't have as much experience
Mm.
in foraging or utilizing local ingredients like you um, do you find that that they're receptive to the idea? And then that's one. And two, though, how do you what's your process? Is your process, you know, these are the proteins I want to work with on this menu. Um, I need something I need something with a little heat, a little spice. Or are you working the other way where you're foraging and kind of saying this would go great with a piece of fish or
At,
whatever?
at this point, I'm foraging, and that's where my kind of brain space for creativity probably comes in for me at this point. But I can tell you the first concept I developed that was going to be heavily relied on foraging was write the menu and let's go through, okay, let's write a 10-item menu. Let's go through that 10-item menu and make sure there's a foraged ingredient on every single menu item.
Mhm.
Okay. And then same thing, just organically let it evolve as we see and scout. And, when I grew up doing this, I grew up in, exploring the back roads and the backwoods and the deserts of Arizona, hunting, camping, backpacking, fishing, whatever it may be. But to actually start putting it together as a restaurant concept was, 11 years ago now, uh, to a space where, okay, let's for sure keep this approachable for everyone. So it can't all be foreign and, can't
Right.
all be words that no one has any clue what these things mean or where it came from. But let's start putting, almost a speaking point
Yeah.
on on
Yes.
all 10 of those menu items and like, oh, and this has prickly pear in it, and this has pickled choina buds in it. And then from there, the restaurants that we've opened since then have probably had a little bit of my reputation behind them, which is nice, but people expecting that that's what's going to
Mhm.
Right.
restaurant. I was seeking out like, well, let's go see what's on. We thrived on these omakase style menus that are never printed, they're never typed, they're in the moment. For me, I learned that in Japanese cuisine, but how well it lent itself to delving into what Arizona cuisine actually is, it lent itself great to it because one, your servers become super informed, and your
Right.
servers in front of the house staff become super involved in what's going on with the cuisine, learning the story, understanding the passion, seeing, chefs crawl into the kitchen covered in mud and dirt and turn these things into this thing over here, that it's awe-inspiring for me at the end of the day because I remember telling my wife when we left Chicago and we left very good jobs in Chicago to open a restaurant in Cave Creek that either everyone's going to really love this and be really receptive to this, or I'll be back working in Japanese cuisine. And, 11 years later, it's what I've staked my claim on and my reputation because I think, people often talk about math being the universal language. I think it is, but I think food is the number one
Yeah.
universal, which we all have to eat. We all have to congregate around a table, or for us chefs, a trash can. But that's where our culture comes from. That's where we sit and talk about our day, or we sit and talk about the night before, is always around a table with food and drink,
Yeah.
and to make that part of the story has always been big for me. And I'm not old, but I'm too old to have grown up seeing celebrity chefs. There was no such thing as the Food Network. There just wasn't those things. So, the people I looked up to were people like Zane Grey and Edward Abbey, and people
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Nice.
they were living their adventures, and this is how I was able to live my adventure.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Um, well, it's funny. Well, or when we talk about the temporary, you wanna go back to that because we were talking a little bit about that ingredient popping up more and more. And I when I when I think about the future, I'm curious about the tension between like we had Tamra on, and she was talking about how to approach that to approach foraging required a certain philosophical underpinning that had to do with knowing what you're doing, not just about safety, like you could pick something that could hurt you, but
Mhm.
also about like how to interact with the environment in a way that doesn't hurt the environment.
100%.
And yeah, could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because I'm curious, um, as this becomes a broader idea, I think we're a long way away from having to worry about so many people going and foraging. I mean, I think there's a very large gap between we got to get people out of commodity foods and
Yep.
into that. But at the same time, I think it is important when people come in and they trust you in an omakase setting, right, where they need to put themselves in your hands.
Right.
Is a leap of imagination that they have to take as well. But in my mind, that's also part of the philosophical underpinning of seeking out, your good work. So
Yeah.
maybe you could talk a little bit about that dynamic.
Well, yeah. So for me, I've seen a handful of, and no names mentioned on the podcast. That's the rule. But
Yeah.
I've seen a handful of people, with larger local companies, and I've physically been with a couple of them where it's one thing or another, but I'll watch, and it's the one time I've gone with some of the people, but I'll watch them strip somewhere clean. Uh, and it's
Right.
probably been a long time since I've put myself in that position, but it makes me sick to my stomach, uh,
Hmm.
because you're there. Those folks are there just for the story, just
Right.
for just for their story, just for how it's going to make them look, how people are going to talk about them, with absolutely zero connection to nature.
Yeah.
My heart's connected to this earth, and that's the religion that I follow, is nature, and what the earth provides for me, and at the same time what the earth takes away from us. For me, we talk and preach pretty hard about the rule of three.
Okay.
I'm gonna take up to one third. I'm gonna leave two thirds, another third for the birds and the bees,
Mhm.
another third for natural propagation,
I see.
right? Animals thrive on these plants, birds thrive on these plants. You start messing with plants in a big way, the bees start messing up, and
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
the last bees on the earth that we want to mess with. Uh, and so for me, it's not to get kind of quirky or weird. It's a sacred thing for me. It's a highly, highly important thing to me. And that's the funny thing, is that ties into the generation that, we're living in now. Is I'm gonna go to the store and get 17 T-bones because 17 of my friends are coming over and I want to make T-bone steaks. Like,
Yeah.
that's that's not how my brain works. So we're gonna buy a whole cow,
Right. 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 Right.
the whole cow snouted.
Yeah.
And I do the same thing with plants. I'm gonna utilize it from root to flower,
Yeah.
in all different times of the year for different applications. That's how the earth wants us to eat.
Yeah.
I
Well,
just I just got done with fiddlehead, for not done, but
right.
we're in the midst of fiddlehead, fern harvest, and, someone said a couple weeks ago, like, "Well, how many of those can you eat at a time?" Like, "Well, I don't know. It's not the center of my plate. It's something that goes with it because, uh" that's not how natives ate. They didn't come and make a salad of And it wasn't, it wasn't that thought of like, we want this tonight. Okay, let's go gather all this and eat everything that the forest provided. And it's so much less meat centralized in your diet. I received an amazing book years ago, and I wish I remembered who gave it to me, but it was on West African cuisine. And it, it didn't it taught me things about West African cuisine, but it didn't teach me this in the moment, but it was kind of an aha eureka moment of how I had naturally over the course of time started using so much less meat in my foods
Mhm.
or meat as seasonings or enhancements or flavors and let grains or vegetables that grow with more prevalence kind of take center focus over the course of
Mhm.
like, okay, well, that's, historical indigenous West African cuisine. Guess what? The indigenous cultures of America were the same way,
Mhm.
Yeah.
where, we as people that came across and colonized, I don't, I don't think that very many probably Anglo settlers embraced Native American ways. We kind of typically had that Western European embrace of like, well, we got to go show them how to like educate themselves and how to build roads and how to make
Mhm.
and tricky subject, but religion and such. They already had all of that.
Sure.
They already had all of that, and the earth was thriving when we arrived here. I
Yeah.
think backwards to that a little bit.
Without a doubt. And when you use the term sacred, I mean, in the connection to nature, certainly foraging puts you in the position to observe and be in contact with nature in a very, very direct way.
Yeah.
However, I would expand that to include um, the dynamics that even go on at farmers markets, where
Yeah.
you are in connection with the people who are growing the food, and that connection, I think, informs the way you feel about what you're making from that environment. Or, and
Sure.
I will use that expression, "Shake the hand that feeds you,"
Yeah.
as a way. So, and I consider that a way to deepen people's relationship to what it is they're making for themselves, making for their families and their friends. And as we talk about snout to tail, or all of that. I mean, Oren, you had some experience at one of the restaurants you've owned over time called Farm Boy, where both making sure you use the whole animal and not, ordering just the same cuts. And ironically, I think as you thought about portions, I think you came to some similar conclusions about what 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 did it mean to serve, a barbecue sandwich, or some of the things you've done in the past as
Well, yeah, it sounds like we're definitely in alignment on that
well.
with you, Brett, as far as I think constraints, like what you were talking about before, you put constraints on it, that one third theory or that practice puts a constraint on it. And as we know, constraints create, that's like the mother of creativity, right? If
100%.
yeah, so it's going to create a better dish and a better experience for the diner, and that's awesome that I've never heard it put that way,
Well,
but I've always heard, like I did a farm tour with Joel Salatin out east at Polyface Farms, and very obviously a very well-regarded farmer the way he farms at least, and he puts it as, we let nature take 25%, and
like,
that's like of his flock of everything. So he knows he's giving it back.
yep.
And then Dan Barber wrote a
Yeah,
great book, and how he was talking to that foie gras guy in
yeah, yeah,
Spain who said, yeah, the eagles come and take the eggs, and that's just us, it's our symbiotic relationship with nature.
Right.
So that's great. But I agree with you. I think, toning down that center of the plate and making it more of a storytelling experience, where I think that's where the diner who's accustomed to that, 12-ounce or 16-ounce center cut portion, they can appreciate a 4-ounce
Yep.
cut because it's not about the cut,
Right.
you know probably better than anybody that you walk into a steakhouse and the ounce of the cut is kind of what jumps out at you. And "Oh, this is a 24 ouncer, 16 ouncer, 20 ouncer." And here, as opposed to that, it's about telling that story. And we've seen it in some of your menus, but how do you tell the story now? Like, do you tell the story? Do you like to tell the story through the flavors? Do you write it into the menu? Like, how are you telling that story of how do people experience what you're experiencing through your food?
I think it's got to be a lot of kind of firsthand interaction. Uh, when I'm doing tasting menus or I'm doing dinners, I try and keep them intimate enough, or have enough staff that I can actually speak to the table. Like,
Mm,
uh, oftentimes when we're doing pop-up dinners, we do it in the same way. I don't print a menu. I don't put it down. I want people to, I want to engage with everyone
Yeah,
and
nice.
like, here you're having 2 parts of the cattail. This is one that we collected 6 months ago and pickled and preserved. This is something that we just picked fresh today. I wanna have that interaction. Uh, just going back to, like, the authors that I idolized as a young man was I wanna tell you verbally. I wanna be an orator. I wanna tell you
Yes.
my story of how this happened, how this came to be, and, it was a cold, foggy morning, but humid enough that the mushrooms were popping up on the rim, and
uh,
got these, and the inspiration behind this, was A, B, C, and D, and that's how we arrived at Z. To really be able to not just tell a story with my dishes that's fun, but something, like I said,
Right.
that's sacred that you're connected to.
that's awesome.
The language matters. I think like that, your willingness and interest in doing that, I think, it matters because I think a lot of the education takes place in connecting the executive function of the brain with the lizard function of the brain.
Yep.
Like people are going to react to the flavors because the flavors will speak to them in and of themselves. But it's the language that you put with the executive function of the brain which will make the behavior happen again. Because if this great experience now has a story, I think about that movie Sideways, right? Probably
Yep.
did more for Pinot Noir than anything else. And I think the whole movie, comes in that description of how Pinot Noir, grows. And he's like, oh,
Right.
the gentle fog comes down, and it's not a forest grape like that
Right.
Merlot. It's a, I mean, it's so. I think that discipline and that skill that you have, first of all, I think it's rare because not you have to broaden your capacity to
Right.
communicate. So you're communicating through your flavors, but to put the words with it too, is just extraordinary. Well, listen, we could talk to you for about another 12 hours or
Yeah.
so, and we have more questions than you have time to give
Sure.
us. But there is going to be some people who chef may be unfamiliar with you, and this might be a way that they get to know you. Can
Yep.
you tell us a little bit about how people should find you, and where can they come experience your good work?
So, a couple of years ago, I sold out of the only restaurant that I had going at that point in time. That was in Oak Creek Canyon, the table at Junipine. And I came down and I joined as a food and beverage director, with Merkin Vineyards, Caduceus Cellars, Queen Bee, Ciders and Meads, and 4-8 Wineworks. So, uh, everything that Maynard James Keenan is up to up in the valley with wines, I came to design a food concept that went with all of those labels. So, went from went from a very small one restaurant, Merkin Osteria, on Main Street in Old Town Cottonwood, to 300 seats on top of the hilltop in Cottonwood,
Wow.
with vineyards, encompassing the entire property. We opened 4-8 Fried Chicken last year, and we opened Queen Bee Vinyl Cafe late last year, with some more plans, but for more expansion. But uh, the idea that, Maynard had a long time ago that, you know, over the course of time, as you expand, you gotta bring in some couple, 2, 3 heavy hitters, to get it over the finish line. So in the Verde Valley, we have 3 restaurants. We have 2 wine tasting rooms, uh, all the vineyards, of course, but we have 5 acres of cultivation and 3 greenhouses that back up all of the restaurants. So I'm able to continue this on. I'm able to teach a larger group of
Yeah,
people
nice.
how farm to table works, how forage to table works, and that was, don't get me wrong, I love being the guy cooking in my own restaurant. That part, I'm not sure will ever die from me, and perhaps at some point in my life it'll come back again. But at this point, I was feeling uh maybe maybe the same way that teachers and people in religion feel callings, right, within their hearts and their souls. I was feeling
Yes.
calling to go back and teach cooks how to be cooks, and more importantly, teach chefs how to be really good chefs,
Mhm.
and really utilize things that are hyper seasonal and things that are hyper local. And I mean, for God's sakes, 5 minutes behind me, we have 5 acres of produce and an entire agricultural team that I work with to tell them, we plant with a purpose, right? Let's plant things to plant things. We're planting things with the purpose. What wants to grow up here? And then through the scope of all the restaurants is how do we see Italian cuisine at Merkin Trattoria through the scope of an Arizona lens?
Nice.
Mhm.
What's easy for me about it, and I think the point's starting to come across to a lot of my cooks, is we're growing wine around here because it resembles Italy.
Yeah.
The produce is similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes it's just those little things though that bridge a gap,
Yeah.
bridge a very large gap very quickly.
Mhm. Yep.
Oh yeah, I never thought about it that way. And I often tell people I wouldn't have thought about it that maybe some gaps I've bridged on my own, but I learned from someone too. I learned from people as well. And this is that we all start off at this many years old in the kitchen,
Mhm.
and we all grow, and we all learn how to do things in different ways. But for me, in a nutshell, it kind of brought everything that I was satellited doing
Yeah.
all into one company. And there was a group of people that needed someone like me, and I sort of needed a group of those people, and it was just a good natural feel, coming here. And it's subtly different than a lot of things I've done, but it's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get to teach, I get to speak, I get to educate, I get to just show people
Yeah.
how my my bald head works on things.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good.
We got
Well, I was,
Baldi's going, Oren, you should grow some facial hair.
Yeah, I
yeah.
know, right?
I was saying to Oren before you joined, I said Maynard would either really like this or really not like this. In that,
Oh, nice.
I know him more as a vintner, restaurateur, and a jujitsu black belt than I know of him as a musician.
But that's kind of been always the funny thing for he and I obviously am well aware that he's a musician, but his dad was his high school PE teacher and wrestling coach. My dad was my high school wrestling coach and PE teacher. Maynard's roots lie in Michigan. My roots lie in Michigan. So most of the time, and my roots lie in like a firm foundation of Arizona cuisine. And I'm one of the only restaurants that's ever had an all Arizona wine list and on my menu. Uh,
Nice.
so that's the world we live in together. Is yeah, I know you're very well known in other circles, but for me, and well, this is important. So, like, you want to talk about food, wine, wrestling, jujitsu. Those are all
Yeah.
that are part of my foundation as well. So,
Oh, that's great.
it's just it's a funny thing. Yeah, I mean, I went all the way through college wrestling, so it's
Oh, terrific.
down in your guys' neck of the woods.
Right?
Yeah, wrestlers. I love wrestlers, and as it relates to jujitsu, you always know when you're rolling with a wrestler because
Yep.
they carry a certain ferociousness they just can't help. And
Yep.
one of his teachers, maybe you know him too, Todd Fox, was on a jujitsu podcast I have called the Jujitsu Mindset. And so I think you have a Kitsune wine that
Yep.
is a reference to Professor Todd Fox. So
There is.
yeah, that's so great. Well, listen, we hope that you come back again. We know you're very busy, but we would
No,
love
yeah.
to talk some more with you. And this was a great conversation.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah, and I'm kind of like this has been eye-opening for me. Obviously, it's the first time I was able to that we've met, but to really look at your work and your history, and it's very impressive. And for what Pete and I do. That's why we love this podcast, is we get to learn with the audience, like, about all these different awesome storylines going on with Arizona cuisine and foraging and agriculture. And your story is definitely awesome, and what you're doing is amazing. And we
Yes.
definitely want to support that more. We'll come visit you for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Selves up the mountain and down into the valley, and I'll be here either foraging or cooking.
That
That's
sounds
awesome.
amazing.
We'll definitely be there soon.
All right. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Brett. Appreciate
Yeah.
you joining us.
Cheers.